a lot of them did not return back to the General Assembly by an act that is completely an expression of the people's will, and by making sure that this happens, then these are the kind of signs that when the Lord he sees that enough and feels okay and decides to act, you will see a miraculous intervention, a miraculous power of God. Do not be distracted by all the distractions, and neither way should you be distracted by the things that is going on. And if you remember that same last session, as we recount it, we were talking about people that need to organize. And I use again the Southeast, but I know in every tribe in Nigeria they have a system of their own culture. And I want to also in this day to tell the soldiers that you do not discount culture and ethnicity even in the religion, because Christianity, for example, you can see is a cultural movement, is a traditional movement, and that culture and tradition is that of Christ. What is culture? A way of life of Christ. That is the whole meaning of Christianity. Living like Christ. That's a culture of his own. In as much as it's built around the context of Jewish tradition and Jewish customs, but you'll find that at the time the Christianity started to go to Rome, Paul wrote to them in Romans chapter 12, verse 1 to 2, to caution them about assimilating traditions and customs that contravenes or contrary to that of Christ. And that's why, if you remember in the book of 2 Corinthians in chapter 10, he talks about bringing every thought and ideas and culture and whatever it is that is not consistent with that of Christ into conformity with the truth. So you will see that as much as we accept the culture, you will find that even before Christianity, there was a religion. And a lot of these original religions are already in tune with God's will and plan before idolatry entered into some of these cultures, like, for example, into Southeast, and then corrupted the place. I'm not telling you things are things you can dig up and find out in your own research, whether that is the truth or not. So, but what we're saying is that as a Christian people, and I say there is a culture and a tradition that, as the interpretation and misinterpretations were given and the different contexts provided by people that profit out of Christianity and Judaism, they now have created a system that is so corrupt that people do not even know what they are doing. But as soldiers, we are called to challenge that. And part of challenging that is to make sure that you don't continue in the ways of your fathers and your forefathers. And as we were told by the prophet Ezekiel in chapter 18, if you start to read from verse 5, you will be able to see and hear his word saying that if you change your ways, then God will forgive you, and the sins of your ancestors and your fathers will not be imputed against you. It will not be against you. That's why the young people need to decide, because you know that the Lord already made up his mind on what he's going to do to those that have continued to challenge him and those that have continued to enjoy and rejoice in such a wicked and evil ways. For that is not the way for the future, for the things that the Lord is going to do for Africa and for the rest of the world, that there will be a refreshment, a renewal, and to return. And even as you have been told by this ministry about the Christianity that you have today in Western civilization is being corrupted from what was given unto them by Africans, because we know where it came from, and then how the corruption entered into it by the influence of the same culture and the customs and traditions that Paul wrote to the Romans about in Romans chapter 12, verse 1 and 2 that we just mentioned earlier. So, but as you know that over time, just like even the Israelites got corrupted by the people around them, the Moabites and Chiites and Babylonians and all the people, and at each point in time you saw God act. So that is why we are saying that it is important for us as a people to remember. And also in the last worship gathering we had a message, we reminded you about the word of the soldiers by following the word of Christ. And then we gave you some instances about the word of Christ. You know, like in the season after the resurrection of Christ comes in a time of introspection, a time of meditation, a time of retreat, a time of reflection. a time to find yourself, find your way, because after that they were lost, they were scared, they were afraid, they were hiding. But the Lord himself, after resurrection, visited them and before ascending into heaven, and he told them to go and wait. So it is a time we visit, and some of you I have already visited a couple of times. And when I visit you, it is a time for us to fellowship like brothers and sisters, to talk about the goodness of God in our life, the marvelous gift of reconciliation with God, his power and his anointing to be able to touch your life. And we gave you examples about those that Christ himself have healed and those he visited, like Mary and Martha. And at the time we remember we said that Mary and Martha was also visited by Christ as part of his ministry. So from there we say we're going to go to us in the summer to enjoy the beauty of God's creation on the outdoor. And you've seen what they had done with in the past 2 years in destroying the tradition that those of us, especially those in America, know that every summer we have our worship in open space, in the park and in different places, wherever that the Lord leads us to. That's where we gather and that's where we have our worship. But we couldn't do that in the past 2 years, and we are hoping that we will be able to do that this year. And the visitation is going to continue until we go back on the inside when the weather is adverse inside the church. It doesn't mean that we're not going to have services in the church as we do, but sometimes wherever the Spirit leads to us is where we go, and that's where we fellowship, because that is the way of Christ. That's the tradition and the custom and the culture, Christian tradition, and Christian custom. It is what Christ did. It was what the apostles did. And it is the way the Lord have asked us and led us into organizing and into coming together as the authors of Christ in us, so that we can all fellowship together. When two or three gather, the Lord is there with us, and so also is his Spirit. So you will see that the Lord is always working wonders in our life. Know that when we're talking about the visitation of Christ in the book of Luke in chapter 24, and you saw the example of Christ coming out, walking with the people on the street, and then stopping in somewhere, they cooked and he ate and he broke bread before they realized that Jesus Christ was resurrected and was one among